Sup summoners, and welcome back to another ProGuides Wild Rift video. Today we are going to take a look at the 10 most common solo queue mistakes, so you can make sure to not repeat them in your ranked games, meaning more wins for you. Let's go. So let's start with the very first one and probably one of the most important ones, the so-called jungle differential. Disrespecting the jungle will often lead to your demise. What I'm specifically referring to is, for example, playing against a Lee Sin. What does this mean? So if a Lee Sin is in the game and he's on the enemy team, it's very likely for him to just gank you on repeat. To achieve that, he only has to hit level 2, which he gets after one camp, which is the red buff. And after that, he can just jump into your lane using his second ability into thin air and start beating you up. And then the bad things start to happen. So what happens if you die to a jungle? You basically give him a full level of experience. And then this makes the game impossible to play for your allied jungler. So how can we avoid dying to them? Well, number one, we need to start respecting them. And which way do they usually come from? And where do we place our ward? And then once we have placed our ward, we play towards that side because we know what's there. And let's get straight to the second thing, which is closely linked to junglers. When an enemy disappears into the fog of war, it doesn't really mean he stopped to exist. In many games I've witnessed that players just started fighting once another player left the lane. They're still there, you just don't see them, so why do you think they're gone? For those instances you just have to wait. You just have to wait until you get the information and the confirmation that you can play the game. Unless of course you can deal with the champion anyway. Let's just imagine you win a 3v2 anyway, so then it doesn't really matter. But if you truly believe that once the enemy leaves your lane, he's not just gonna come back, well, you might get yourself killed quite a few times. Therefore, before taking an active play in lane or anywhere on the map, make sure that you know who can actually show up and where can he come from. And if you got the information, go for the play. Let's get to the third point. Taking bad trades. So what exactly is a bad trade? Let's just imagine the wave is pushing into your tower and you want to get a minion last hit. You're just not happy enough with the local gold from the minion. So you step up to get that minion and then get punished. However, since you're already being punished, you want to trade back, but you're already fighting a losing fight, and therefore you're getting beaten up. Consequently, your HP might be too low, and then you might get punished afterwards even heavier. Another thing that you have to take into consideration is the relative power level of champions. Some champions have their core functionality reached level 1, and some take some more time. Some just even need their level 3 to be fully functional in lane, and only after that, taking proper trades is beneficial for them. So when you're going for trades, think about these concepts and then think about the sequencing of the abilities. What ability needs to be used by you in expectation of what ability of the enemy's side. Don't just throw your abilities out for fun, because every cooldown has a reason and every cooldown might be abused in the future. So let's give your brains a small break for our question of the day. What is the most common solo queue mistake you see in your games? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. The next mistake is something that is the bane of every jungler and the bane of every objective. Taking bad recalls. Every time you recall for a specific reason. So what might that reason be? Let's imagine you recall for a dragon, but you already know you cannot physically fight the dragon, so why should you recall for it? What are the other options you might go for? Another thing you have to take into consideration is also the current wave state once you're recalling. Let's imagine your wave is slow pushing into the enemy, meaning your minions are going to die slowly and the enemy minions are going to die fast, and at some point the wave will hit the tower. But as a consequence, if you recall on such a wave state, you will lose minions, whereas the enemy team will not lose minions. And by only such a minuscule detail, you might fall a level behind and then get stomped. And if you continuously do so, you'll fall even further behind and become irrelevant in the game. So whenever you're taking a recall, follow a little checklist. How is the wave looking at the moment? Is the wave in the tower or is it in a neutral state so you're not losing anything? Where is your enemy? And the next thing is there any proactive plays going on? And could you participate with your current resources? And if not, what else could you do? You can also add even more things to this list. It's basically endless if you really want to. You just have to look out for the most important details, which is most of the time the state of the wave and the current objective situation. Other than that, feel free to add anything you want if it has an inherent gold value, because in order to carry games, we basically need two things: gold and EXP. The more we get of those, the more likely we are to carry. And exactly this gets us to the next point. Not playing with the wave at all. Most of the time in solo queue, you'll see people shoving the wave continuously. They'll just shove and then look for something else. But what if I told you that if you abuse mistakes that the enemy is doing, with the wave in particular, to get them killed? So let's just remember the previous point of taking a bad recall. Now that you've the capabilities of identifying a bad recall, you can do so for the enemy. Spotting such behavior can grant you the exact advantage you would have lost to by taking a bad recall yourself. In addition to that, you'll force the enemy to overextend and overstay at the same time. This way it will be an easy time for your jungle to capitalize on that and get fed himself. And then it's just a matter of time to get all the other objectives. What you can also do with the wave is you can build a giant slow push and call your jungle for help. I mean, to be honest, junglers are weird people. They just sometimes don't want to win. It is what it is, but we can at least try. And you build this slow push and then ask for your jungle's assistance and look for a dive. Because if you kill the enemy on a stacked wave, he's going to mold. And he's not gonna come back from that. You can basically ask any Baron laner out there, because this is what happens to them all the time. Next on the list is point 6. Focusing Dragon. The dragon is completely worthless in solo queue. Yes, some of you will actually hunt me for this, but doing dragon in solo queue will more likely lead to a defeat than a victory. The reason for that is rather simple. In a solo queue environment, it's very hard for you to trust your teammates. Even in challenger games, I don't even trust them. I don't want to do dragons unless I know the players personally, and that's not really a good thing. In theory, these buffs are pretty cool and neat to get, but the risk you expose yourself to by getting those dragons is insane. So unless they're very free, be very careful when you think about doing them. Rather shy away, collect waves and do the herald, it's just better. Because just think about this, at 1000 HP, a mountain dragon grants you a 60 HP shield. That's barely a little more than a third of a ruby crystal, which is worth 500 gold. And then if you think about this, okay, if we go for this, our entire team might die, and then the actual gold advantage for the enemy carries double, maybe even triple as much as the actual dragon itself. So if you think about the fact that dragons are important, then you might be misled by the circumstances that your team died to the enemy team and therefore they got a big item advantage. However, there's one thing or two things that are actually broken about dragon. Number one, it's the cloud dragon. The movement speed is game breaking if you know how to use it. And number two, of course, it's the elder dragon. But nonetheless, you can win every single game without getting a single dragon. Getting the elder dragon is the most important thing there is, but losing every other dragon before that is completely fine. You can still win. It's solo queue. The next point is something that a lot of people do because, I mean, it's easy to do. Just following builds blindly without understanding how they work. So a lot of times you will see people just open up the champion leaderboard and clicking on the first place and be like, okay, I'll just build this, and that. Then they have copied the build and then they move on. But you should not do this. Never. If you want to do it like this, rather look at the first 10 builds and look for similar builds. And then try to understand what each and every item is going to contribute to the build's strength. Then try to figure out if there are not better options for specific items. It's more important to understand what your build is trying to do than just following it blindly. Because if you don't know what it's supposed to do, how can you play properly? Number 8. Numbers advantage is only a factor among others. By that I mean, a lot of players will see 3 people, however they are low HP, but will shy away from fighting them, even though they have used all their cooldowns. But why? Because there are more. But what does it matter? Let me tell this, but let me explain. A champion is only as useful as its kit, and if the kit features being dependent on cooldowns, then having no cooldowns turns you into a minion. And by such definition, you can be farmed by any other champions if you forget about that and misposition yourself. However, this is completely dependent on other people punishing you for your mistakes. And this is only something that very few select people in the higher elo brackets do. Consequently, if you go down the ladder, it's unlikely for you to be punished for what you're doing, because players just do what they want to do because they feel like they want to do that at the moment. It's not necessarily a specific reason why they do this, in terms of I want to win the game, so I need to punish this and that cooldown. So whenever you're observing a fight or think about joining a fight, look at what abilities they're using, and then think about what you can do once they're on cooldown. So don't just try to think about the numbers advantage as a law that stops you from making a play. It sometimes matters, but the circumstance in which it happens matters even more. Think about that. The next tip is about respecting early game oriented champions in lane. So what this is about, it's basically thinking about, okay, what can a champion do? For this I have the 1, 2, 3 and 5 principle. Every champion has a dynamic power level that drops or increases depending on levels in a certain matchup. Let's take Riven against Irelia. So Riven's level 1 is broken, she can just straight up beat you up. However, Irelia is very dependent on getting her passive stacks. Therefore Irelia doesn't really have a chance on the first level. As a consequence, Irelia should skill her third ability to farm the minions safely from range, because whenever Irelia would get close to the Riven, Riven could capitalize on that mistake and beat her up, given that she knows about her being stronger. The same also applies playing a melee champion into a ranged champion. There are certain conditions which you need to wait for until you are able to play. A more simplified matchup, for example, would be playing against the Blitzcrank on the Dragon lane. Once he uses his hook ability, what can he do? He just looks at you, and he needs to run at you to get anything done, and if you're a ranged champion, you can beat him up to the point where his first ability is ready again. Other than that, he's just useless. Last but not least, we come to point 10. Over-rotating, losing minions on repeat, while exposing yourself to a lot of danger. This is something that usually happens to a lot of mid laners and Baron laners. Especially around the Dragon mark, a lot of Baron laners will simply recall and run to the Dragon without giving it any second thought. So if the enemy Baron laner stays on lane and works on minion waves and the tower, you'll get so much gold and you'll be unable to play your lane unless you get ridiculously lucky in the Dragon fight in terms of kills. So this is especially something you have to keep in mind if you're playing against split-oriented champions, because they can use that to get ahead and make your life a living hell. The next thing about the middle lane is that if you want to walk away and rotate to somewhere, you have to walk through fog or wall, and against certain champions you're simply not allowed to do so. Let's take the example of playing into a Zed as an Orianna. You just can't walk into the river, because if you do so, you might end up dying instantly. It's just not worth the risk. Another thing to add though is, before you go anywhere, you have to check what is going on. Number 1, check your wave state, what is happening to your wave. Step 2, check the play you want to go to. And answer yourself the following question: can you even make it in time to make it worth your while? Because otherwise, slaying minions and hitting on plates is just better for you. So consequently, before you do anything, think about why you're doing it. And most importantly, don't get swayed by your teammates' emotion. Rather think about everything yourself and improve on your mistakes. And with that, we're done for today. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to not miss anything ProGuides ever again. See you tomorrow.